In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to properly install Windows 11 on a VM within TrueNAS Scale. Now, the first thing we have to do is obviously go to the old internet, and we're going to go to our server. After we log in, you can see that we have the server here. So I am on version 24. And one thing you're going to want to do before kind of jumping into this, you're going to want to enable VMX or Intel virtualization if you're on an Intel platform. But like me, I'm running AMD Ryzen. So in this instance, you would want to do AMD V, or for my motherboard, it was called SVM. And you're going to want to enable that, and that's going to allow you to do virtualization. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do is go to the datasets. We're going to want to make a dataset in here so we have a place that everything can sleep. So we're just going to call that VM and we'll save it. And now that's going to be where we're going to dump everything. Now we're going to go to System Settings and we're going to go to Advanced. Then all the way down here at the bottom, we have Isolate GPU Devices. Now you need a dedicated graphics card to make this work, because obviously if we're going to be using this for gaming, then we need a GPU. So the APU, because I'm running a Ryzen 5 5600G, the integrated graphics for that is what's actually running the server itself. So if we go to Configure, and right here it gives a little warning, because if we allocate the integrated graphics, then the server is not going to work. And under GPUs, you can see right here that we have the integrated graphics to the processor. So if we picked this one, then the NVIDIA graphics card is what the server is actually going to be using just to do like standard server stuff, and that's a giant waste. So we're going to want to uncheck that, and we're going to want to check the RTX 3070. So now we can make this into an isolated GPU. So that way we can pass it through to the VM. So we'll save this. It's going to take a little bit, and then we'll refresh the page just to make sure that everything worked. Now that's done. So right here, you can see there's nothing there. So we're just going to refresh the page. And now you can see that we have an isolated GPU devices, and it is the RTX 3070. Oh my God, what are you guys doing? Apparently the cats just decided to have a party. Anyway, moving on. Now that we have a GPU for the VM and we have somewhere to dump it, well, now we can go to the virtualization. In here, we can add virtual machine, or we can just click up here if you already have one. And an important thing to factor into is having enough memory. So right now we do, because I've just restarted the server, so we're good. But if you have less RAM than what you're going to be allocating to the server, it's not going to want to boot. Rule of thumb for this is that you want the server to have 8 gigabytes. You want to have 1 gigabyte per terabyte of storage that you have, and then whatever's left over you can just use for all this junk. So the server itself, 8. I have 16 terabytes, so that's going to be 24 gigs of RAM, and I have 32 gigs of RAM in this, which means I have 8 gigabytes left over. So that's what we're going to allocate to this. So we can go to the guest operating system. We can go to Windows. We will enable Hyper-V. We will call this Windows, and you can't use spaces in this. If you want to name it something else, you can do underscores if you want to add more than one word, but I'm just going to call it Windows. For the description, this is going to be Windows 11 Pro, because I want to be able to host this on Microsoft Remote Desktop. I'm mostly going to be using Parsec, but having that as a backup is always good to have. Now for the password, we can just enter whatever we want here. So now you know what my password sounds like. We'll click next, scroll back up. For the virtual CPUs, I'm going to pick 1. For the cores, I'm going to pick 4 cores of this 6-core processor, and it has 16 threads, so I'm going to pick 8 of those threads, because 4 cores, 8 threads. Now for the CPU mode, I'm going to pick host pass-through. So that's going to allow the actual CPU itself to see the VM, or the VM to see the CPU. For the memory, we've already established that I'm going to be using 8, and we will click next. Now for the disk, we want to create a new disk image. We're going to keep it on AHCI. For the ZVol, we're going to pick the VM that we created there. So that's where we're going to dump everything. And for the space, 1 TB. So that's going to be 1024 gigabytes. Now for the network adapter, we have to pick one during the setup, but we have to remove it after. So now in this instance, I'm going to explain what's going on. But if you're only using this for gaming, then you can pick Intel, and then you can just pick the factory motherboard network interface card. So that's the Ethernet cable that's going directly into your motherboard. Now this instance right here is going to work completely fine for gaming. But what I did was I went and picked up this Bros Trend 2.5 gigabit network card. It was on Amazon. It was super cheap, and I literally just needed something that the VM can connect to. So I picked that up, and after testing and everything, I didn't have any issues at all with it. It's working absolutely perfect. Now I didn't really like the silver bracket that was on that, so I just kind of popped that off off real quick. And then I took that bracket, I scuffed it up, made sure it was nice and clean, and then grabbed some primer. Started spraying both sides, letting it dry nice and evenly, and then again, some flat black paint. Did both sides, just like the primer, let that dry, slapped it in the server, and now with another network cable plugged into that one, that can actually be allocated to the VM itself. So now the VM is going to have its own network, so that way this can connect to the server through TailScale. So that way it's actually acting as its own like second computer on the network, and then it'll be able to access Samba so I can, get the files for the video editing, this video that you're watching right now. Just going to keep it simple and add a network card. It also saves on bandwidth because we're not pushing and pulling directly off of the same network card. With all of that being done, we can click next. Now for the installation media, we can actually upload a new image file if you don't have one on here. We can choose the directory for it. So we could just dump that into VM, and then we can choose a file, and we can just pick this Windows 11 ISO. So once that's all uploaded and everything's fine, this is where we would pick the GPU, but this part is actually broken because for some reason, if we pick a GPU, it's going to give us an error. Right now, we're just going to skip that and hit next. Then we can save all those settings, but before we start this up, we want to just expand this and we want to go to devices. For Windows 11, we don't want to have any internet when we're setting this up. So we're actually going to delete the network interface card, and now we have to add the GPU. So we can add, and we're going to do a PCI pass-through device. And then right here, we can pick the RTX 3070, and then we can hit save, add another device. Again, we're going to pick a PCI pass-through device. And for the device itself, we're going to pick the same device, so GA104, except this one here is the audio controller, and then hit save. We can just ignore this, so that's totally fine, confirm, and continue. There we go, so everything's done. And this is going to be the graphics card and audio, but there's more to this that we have to fix, so we'll get into that after. Now we can finally go to the virtual machines. You can see that we have enough memory to start this up, and everything is ready to go, so we can go to display. Obviously, this doesn't look like a Windows install, so we can go to Spice, and we can send Control-Alt-Delete, so that way it knows that we're trying to, interact with this. There we go, so now it's rebooting, and press any key. There we go. Now it's actually loading the ISO for Windows 11. In this part here, we actually have to do Shift F10 because we have to open command prompt, and in here we're going to open the registry editor with regedit. Now we can go to our H key local machine, go to system, and then setup. And on this setup, we're going to right click and we're going to go to new, and we're going to add a new key. And this one is called lab with a capital L and then capital C for config. So lab config, and it is case sensitive. Now in here, we can right click, go to new, and we're going to add a D-word 32-bit value. So we'll click this. And now for the names on all of these, they're all going to start with bypass. And if you want to bypass the RAM, so say you don't have 8 GB of RAM, then you're just going to want to type in RAM check. If you don't have a compatible CPU, because we passed through the CPU, so this one's going to be compatible, then again, you do CPU check. But for this instance, we will need the TPM check because we're running on a VM that doesn't have TPM 2.0 support. So we'll pick that one, and we'll just hit enter and change that value to 1. And you would do the same thing for a RAM or CPU check. And again, we're going to right click new, and we're going to add a D-word 32-bit value. And this one is called bypass SecureBoot check. And again, hit enter, 1, enter, and we are done. We can close that, close this, and we can continue with the install. So now it's actually going to let us, because it's going to think that we have a compatible computer, because we have a compatible computer, regardless of Microsoft thinking that we don't. Now I'm just going to enter my serial number for Windows 11 Pro, which then brings us here so we can agree to the Microsoft agreement, sell our soul. We're going to go to the custom install here, and we can pick this 1 terabyte drive that we made earlier, and we're just going to hit next. That's it. Now we can just sit back and wait for Windows to install. Now it's rebooting, so it's going into the out-of-box experience. And we're not done with the fun stuff yet because we still have to go back into command prompt once we're in there. And there we go. So the out-of-box experience is loading. We can hit yes. And my mouse doesn't work. That's super cool. Just refresh the page there. Okay, so yes. US keyboard, we'll skip that one. And now this is where it wants us to connect to a network, and that is why we got rid of the NIC. So we're going to do Shift F10, open command prompt, and in here we want to type in UBI, so the out-of-box experience, and we're going to be doing a backslash, not a forward slash. We want to do a backslash, and we're going to do bypass network registration online. So bypass NRO. And now it's going to reboot again, except this time it's going to allow us to continue past the network screen without having the internet. So now we're back in, it's loading up, and again, we can just hit yes. We're still in Canada, still using a US keyboard, and we're gonna skip that one. But now we have, oh my God, I don't have internet. Wow, and I would love to continue with a limited setup. This is exactly what I wanted. Now we can actually enter a username, and we don't have to log in with a Microsoft account where they are legally allowed to monitor everything you do, and they can sell all of it for marketing information. So this is the only way to get past that. And that's kind of ridiculous. Now that we're finally up and running, I'm just going to completely shut this down because we don't have internet. So we need to add that network card again. And while that's shutting down, we can go to TrueNAS and sign back in. Now this is automatically just going to change once it's disconnected. So while it's doing that, we can go to devices and we can add a new device. And this one here is going to be the network interface card. The adapter type is just going to be the Intel one that we picked previously. And we're going to attach this to the second one. So again, if you're just using this for gaming, you can just pick the first one. You don't need a second network card. So that's been added. And now we don't need the CD-ROM anymore. So I will delete that. That'll just make it boot a little bit faster because it's not going to be trying to read that like the Windows 11 ISO every time. And that's perfect. So now we can go back to the virtual machines and we can turn this back on. And then we can go to display. Now we have internet. From this point, I'll save you guys the struggle. I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to kind of optimize this a little bit. Just get rid of a bunch of bloat and just stuff that I don't want. So that way it's just a cleaner setup. I'm going to finish all the Windows updates, install the driver for the graphics card, and we'll come back to starting to set this up for gaming. So now that I have this all cleaned up and only what I'm going to be using, I have Forza Motorsport 7 installing because the new one is still a piece of garbage. So we're going to continue on to getting all this set up while we're waiting, somewhere around 3 to 5 years for this game to download. So in settings, we can go to System, all the way down to the bottom to About, and you can see right here that we have the AMD Ryzen 5 5600G. So it's fully detecting the CPU as if this is a native CPU built right into it as a desktop computer. We have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and that can be upgraded as we add more physical memory to the server in the future. Now under the display, we can go to Device Manager, Display Adapters, and you can see that we have the RTX 3070, so everything there is working perfect. And finally in File Explorer, if we go to this PC, you can see that we have 1 terabyte of storage. So everything is working perfect. Obviously that frame rate is absolute garbage, so we need to improve that. So we're going to be using Parsec. So let's open Edge. We'll just search for Parsec. Go to their website, and I just want to show here that that's fine. Just take up almost half the web page with that. That's cool. In here, there's like the pricing and everything, and it shows all of this, and they're really advertising that Parsec is a subscription program, which like long-term viewers of this channel know that I'm deathly allergic to subscriptions. I refuse to use them. They are the downfall of the future. But down here, they actually do have a free version that you can use. So they just kind of hide this and they don't actually advertise it. So Parsec is actually like a fantastic program, and we don't even need the paid version for this. Like the paid version is obviously better, and I would love to see a standalone version of this. I would be more than happy paying like $100 to $200 for the software as an upfront amount and then just own the software forever. But it's a subscription, so they're not going to be getting a dime from me. So I just want to get that out of the way. We're going to go to download, and we're just going to download this for Windows 64-bit because that's what this VM is, and we can open this file. Now, obviously, you're going to have to sign up and make an account with Parsec, and this virtual display driver, we don't actually need this because it's not going to work because we're using the free version. So that's fine. I only have one user on here, so it doesn't matter. We can just click next. Now, while it's downloading, we're gonna need a couple things. So we're gonna get IddSampleDriver. We're looking for this one here. It's Mike the Tech, and it's the virtual display driver. So we can go to the releases and we can just download the latest version, which is VDD HDR 2312.zip. Next, we're going to need VB cable, and we can download this. So that's a VB cable driver pack 43. All right, and now this is done, so we can sign in. Now that we're signed into Parsec, we can go right here to settings. We can go to host because that's what this is going to be. And we're gonna wanna pick the client resolution, so that way it'll always match whatever computer we're connecting from. The bandwidth limit, So in this instance here, we're going to be picking 50 megabit per second because this is going to be running on the local network and it's only going to be me using it. Now the MacBook is only 60 frames per second, so I can leave that. But if you're using a newer MacBook with 120, then you can change that, or any other computer like a gaming monitor or something like that with 144 or 240. It's weird that they don't have 165 hertz in there, but I don't know, maybe they'll add it in the future. Now under the quality, I am on the local network, so I can go to the highest quality and it's not going to have any slowdown. But if you're out of the house, you might want to try balanced, unless your internet is, you know, it's an absolute pile, then you're going to want to stay on the lowest latency. But balanced is totally fine out of the house, but in the house here on the local network, totally fine on highest quality. I have absolutely no issues at all. Now that's everything that's completely done, but I do have to restart this because we've changed a couple things, so we'll restart. Now we're actually going to be switching over to macOS. So let's go to our system settings and we're going to click up here to Bluetooth. So now that I have my Xbox controller connected, I can actually close this completely because we no longer need anything in here, at least for now. And on the macOS side, we can actually open Parsec. And you can see that the desktop computer, which is the VM running on TrueNAS, shows up. So let's connect to that. And now we're actually in the VM itself. So we can go to the settings, we can go to our gamepad, and you can actually see that the Xbox controller is coming up. So right here, if I push the A button, you can see that I'm pushing it. B button, X, Y, like everything works totally fine. And that's with a wireless controller. Now, for some reason, if I plug the controller in wired, it just disconnects completely. So this works flawless with PlayStation controllers, but obviously most of the games on PC are going to be using Xbox inputs, at least for what they show in the game. So for getting an Xbox controller working, it works wirelessly. That's kind of the only downfall, but I mean, most people are going to be using wireless anyway. Now, we're basically done in there, but this, you know, this looks terrible. The quality is garbage and the resolution is huge. So we need to fix this. Right here, you can see that we're using software encoding. So it's not even using the GPU. So how are we going to fix this? Well, we'll go to this VDD folder right here. We'll open the folder within the folder and we'll take this IddSampleDriver folder and we'll just drag that out. Go back to the downloads, VDD cable again. And this one, we actually want to extract all because we want that folder. Perfect. We'll drag that out to the desktop. Beautiful. Now let's go to this PC. We're going to open the C drive and we're going to drag both those in there. Now we can open the VB cable folder and go all the way down and we're just going to load the 64-bit setup. So that's VB cable _ setup _ x64. So we're going to right click and run as administrator. Now we can install the driver, install, and okay. Now, wow, we have an audio device. Wasn't that neat? Now we can go back to the C drive and we'll go to the IddSampleDriver in here. Just make sure this option text is in there. And now we can right click on this install certificate, which is going to install the virtual display driver certificate. So we can right click and run as administrator. Go to more info and run anyway. That's done. So we can hit any key to continue. Now we can right click on the start button. We can go to device manager and we can go to action. Nope, we have to click on something and then click action. Then we can add legacy hardware. We will click next. We'll install hardware that we'll manually select. Hit next. We'll do a display adapter. Next, we have the disk and we'll pick the directory. We'll go to this PC, C drive, IddSampleDriver, and that right there is the driver. So we'll open that, hit OK. Now it's going to install that driver for this. So we'll hit next again and we'll just wait until it's done and finished. That's it. Now we technically have a second display. So if we go to settings, go to system, display, now we have the second display here. We can click on this one. We'll change the resolution to something more tolerable, like 1080p. Keep those changes. We don't need resolution scaling on. Now we can go back up to the top here, and with this second display selected, we can go to multiple displays and we can make this the main display. And there we go. Beautiful. Which now this is our main screen and everything is in a very tolerable resolution. So we can just use this as we see fit and the quality of it is fantastic. Or the second option is to remove this completely. So that'll eliminate anything accidentally running in here, but the VM through TrueNAS uses this. If you're never going to be using this display connection here again, then you don't need this at all, and you can just use Parsec from this point forward. The reason I'm going with Windows 11 Pro is well, because I have a Pro product key, so I'm just going to be using that anyway, but it's also because it has Microsoft Remote Desktop in there. And by using the Microsoft Remote Desktop that's built into this, it means that we'll still be able to connect to this one here, and we're just deleting the default one that was made by TrueNAS. So for that instance, I'm going to click on number 2, make sure that's selected, and we're going to go where it says extend these displays, and I'm only going to show on number 2. So we can keep those changes. Now this one is completely disabled and will no longer be able to access this through TrueNAS. And then before we leave, we can go back here to System, and this name right here is what we'll want to connect to in the Microsoft Remote Desktop. But that's only as a failsafe, just in case something goes wrong. As the main source here, we're going to be using Parsec for everything. That's it. So now the display is totally fine, and we didn't need the paid version of Parsec, and we have audio working. And because of that secondary network card, we can actually go to network, and you can see that TrueNAS comes up and it doesn't connect, because of course it doesn't. Oh God, I love Microsoft networking. This is awesome. It was just working. It was just working before I recorded this, but of course it's not now that I wanted to show it. Let's restart the VM. It'll probably work when you turn it off and back on again. That's a thing. So it is working. I'm not sure why this isn't working, but like this happens on bare metal as well. Oh, hey, look, it's working now. Awesome. Username or password is incorrect. I haven't even tried signing in yet. Oh, okay, awesome. Well, it works, so that's cool. Yeah, that's Windows for you. But at least now I can access like all of my files and everything, and now I can download DaVinci Resolve, and I can edit this video on the MacBook, so that way I can use ProRes and everything, and I won't have any issues there. And then when it's ready to render, I can send it off to this as a render server, so that way I'm using the RTX 3070 to actually render the video in the full 8K resolution. So that's it. I'm just gonna let this do its thing or whatever. I'm gonna get it all set up, and then I guess I will show you input latency once this game is done. So I mean, realistically, I'm gonna have to record this like tomorrow, because this is ridiculous. That's weird. Oh, okay, still works. Also my time zone is wrong. Date and time, Eastern. I don't understand why it's not setting automatically. Hey, there we go. Okay, that was weird. The more I use macOS, the more I don't understand why people use Windows. Like, this is So it's the next day, and you can see that we have the Xbox controller connected. I've renamed this to server just so it's easy to distinguish on the network. So from here, we can just launch any game just like we normally would. This is a full Windows computer that we can just readily use. Okay, here we go. Absolutely everything is maxed out except for motion blur. So yeah, read those changes. This looks absolutely fantastic. Also, just for proof of concept here, let's switch over to macOS. You can actually see that I'm connected to Wi-Fi. So this is not a wired connection, and I'm literally in the furthest place away from my router right now, so I don't even have the full bars connected. Jump to the desktop here. Let's open Parsec, go to settings and hosts, and where is it? Down here somewhere. Yeah, right here. So quality, we have this on the highest quality. So this is the absolute most taxing that we can do for this, and it is running absolutely flawless. Now, if I ever left the house, then balance would probably be just fine for me. You know, if your internet isn't that great, or maybe you have like a slower mobile data plan or something like that, then you might want to use the lowest latency setting. But for me, highest quality is working absolutely perfect. Like, this is literally as if I'm just using a Windows PC. Everything here is completely fine. It works. Like, I can go and I can just connect to the NAS. I can access whatever I want from in here. I can start editing videos. This is just literally a full Windows computer that I can access from anything. So I just wanted to show here that the CPU is at 59 degrees Celsius and we're running at 68% fan speed, but that's only because I'm screen recording. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to play the game again for a couple minutes and then we'll come back to see what the readings are without screen recording. So I've just been playing for a little bit there and we are at 43 degrees and 19% fan speed. And obviously this is going to be going up because I just started screen recording. So like this is flawless. This means I can get hours of gaming on a MacBook with like RTX graphics without the laptop actually having to do any sort of work. So this for me is the absolute best gaming solution that you can have for a Mac. Now, one last thing that I want to show here is you don't need, I'm going to put that in quotations, you don't need a network card, like a second one, in order to make this work. So you can do it using a bridge. If we go to network, you can see that we have our two network cards. This one here is the integrated one to the motherboard that TrueNAS is connecting to. And this one here is the one that we've added that the VM is connected to. Now, the reason I have a second one, and this is just for video editing and stuff, because I need to have like full bandwidth in order to stream the footage off of that to edit the videos. Now, my network is only gigabit. So the fact that this is 2.5 doesn't really matter, but this right here is going to be sending out 1 gigabit per second, or, you know, roughly, of bandwidth to the footage to the VM. And then the VM is accepting 1 gigabit per second, or roughly. But if we use only one network on the VM, this is going to be sending out and receiving at the same time. So we're essentially getting half of the speed that we normally would to the share. Just for example's sake here, I'll show you how to set up a bridge anyway, because maybe you're not video editing. If you're just doing this for photography or something where the files, they don't require a massive amount of bandwidth, then this will work completely fine for that. Or another instance is maybe you're playing a lot of retro games and you're emulating, so all of your ROMs are on the server, and then you're just using something like RetroArch in a VM or like Laka, and then you're connected to the SMB where all of your ROMs are. This will also work for that instance. Having your own dedicated network card is pretty much specifically to people who need crazy amounts of bandwidth. And even 1 gigabit networking is kind of like that's the absolute bare minimum that you want. You really do want 2.5 or more for this to be like completely viable. I do run into stuttering issues now and again. So this is going to be an example of having only the integrated network that's built into the motherboard. We're going to completely ignore the card that I've added in. So we can go to edit. Now in here, we're going to disable DHCP, and in the aliases, we're going to add a new one, and it's just going to be the exact same IP address. So 192.168.250.114. So that's this IP address right here. Now we're just going to make sure that port is 24 and we're going to click save. That's it. We can just completely ignore that because we're leaving everything the way it was. And now let's test this connection. Now, if anything goes wrong, it doesn't matter because it's going to reset after 60 seconds if we don't manually save this. And we obviously can't manually save it if we can't connect to this. So we'll test the connection, confirm, and test changes. Now it refreshed. Now sometimes that little loading thing will stay on there, and all you have to do is you just have to refresh the page. And right here it's saying that we have changes that worked, so we can save those changes. So let's save that. Everything is good. Now that we're back in and we know that this is working with DHCP disabled, because we have this off and we have our own IP address here, we'll just copy that, and we're just going to remove this completely. We don't even want this in here, so we'll just save. Now right now, if we test, it's not going to work. So we need to create the bridge. So we're going to click on add. The type is going to be a bridge. The name is just going to be BR0. So it has to be one of these ones here. So bond X, VLAN X, or BRX, and X distinguishes the number of which device it is. So this being the first one, we're just going to pick 0. For the bridge members, because we're going to allocate it to the network card that's built into the motherboard. Again, we're ignoring the one that I added. And for the aliases, we're going to add and change this to the IP address that we would normally connect to on port 24. So it's no longer going to be connecting here. It's going to be connecting through the bridge to this network card. So let's test changes, confirm, and test changes. You can see that it refreshed instantly. We can refresh the page and we can go to the network to save our changes. So we'll save that, save. Now let's go over to virtualization, power off the VM. Now we can go to devices. Under the network interface card, we can go to edit, and we can change this to BR0, which is the bridge that we just made. So now we can save this, go back to the virtual machines, and we can start this up. We're just gonna give that a minute to start up because we can no longer access it here after setting that virtual display driver. So that way we disabled the integrated graphics, or the integrated display that it had, which was stuck at 1280 by 800. And we'll be connecting to it with Parsec. So it's loaded so we can connect, and now we're in Windows, and this is connected through a wired connection. And if we go to our network, you can see that we still have access to TrueNAS. We can still access the SMB just like we normally would. We don't actually need a secondary network card for it. It's just that right now, transferring any files is only going to be half of the bandwidth because the total network card itself only has 1 gigabit per second. So if I need to access this file right now, by opening it, I'm essentially downloading the file from the SMB share, but I'm also uploading it to the VM on the same thing. So it's going to max out the bandwidth at the 1 gigabit per second that I have, except 50% of it is going from the SMB to the VM, and the other 50% is going from the VM to the server. Although this will work, it's not going to work very well for video editing because now I essentially have 500 megabit per second as opposed to 1 gigabit per second. So by having its own dedicated network card and then using TailScale, it just acts as its own standalone device that's able to connect locally, which is what's giving me access to the SMB. If we go back to the dashboard, you can see that we have 3 network devices. So this is the integrated motherboard network card. This is the add-in one that I put, and this is the bridge. But there's even more issues here because now that this network card, it's being allocated to a bridge and the bridge is to the VM, the apps aren't going to work. Like if I connect to Plex, this is just, it's not going to work. So if we restart the server, now that all of this is set up and all the networking and stuff like that, what it's going to do is it's going to take this network card that's no longer assigned to the VM and it's going to put all the apps to this. So let's restart the server. That network card there, the IP address for that one ended in 80. So now the Plex is going to need this to be 80. So now this should be Plex. Oh, right. Once the server actually turns back on. Come on. Connect. Come on. You can see that it connects to a completely different IP address. Even though TrueNAS is using 114, Plex is coming out for 80. And if we go to network, 80 is the add-in network card. So now this is like the worst of both worlds because the VM is connected to a bridge, which is now getting half of the bandwidth to the footage, and all of the apps have their own IP address to everything else, which also means that these are no longer going to be connecting to the SMB because the SMB it's with a different IP address. Like if we just go to music, it works perfect. I don't get it. I don't understand why it does this. It's just some kind of magic happens when you restart it after if you have a second network card in, because now all of the apps are using this, TrueNAS is using this, and the VM is using this, which is bridged to this. So I don't know. I'm going to revert everything back, but I just wanted to point out that it is 100% possible that you can use bridge to connect to an SMB with your VM. You don't actually need a second network card for it. It's just that if you're doing video editing or anything that requires very large bandwidth files, you're gonna need a second network card. It's just really not gonna work without it. And this is definitely something I'm gonna be looking into, is a new motherboard that's gonna have 2.5 gigabit per second or better. And the add-in network card is 2.5 gigabit per second. So I'm just gonna need to get a switch that's 2.5, and then the whole network in between all of this is 2.5 gigabit per second or faster, and I have full upload and download bandwidth between the VM and the shares for the SMB. And then I can edit videos directly off of this thing on like the MacBook, and then I can render them on the VM. So that way I can still render 8K videos without, killing this poor little computer. But hopefully you found something useful here. So, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that. That's cool. You could like the video if you liked it. That's awesome. Or just, I don't know. Don't do any of it. I'm not telling you what to do.
Just slightly ahead of our time. Panasonic.